By the time I turned 27, I had built a software consulting business worth just over $2 million. No investor money. No safety net. No help from my family. Just me, a laptop I bought on a payment plan, and about 4 years of 18-hour days. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened. I am not someone who holds grudges. I am not someone who looks for fights. I spent most of my life trying to be the daughter my parents actually wanted, quieter, more agreeable, less ambitious. I tried for a long time. And then I stopped trying, built something real, and the moment they saw how real it was, they came for it. This is the story of how my mother forged my signature on a business loan application. And how I found out. And what happened after. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. Middle-class neighborhood, nothing remarkable about it. My mother worked in hospital administration. My father was a contractor who had his own small business for years before it started failing when I was around 12. By the time I was in high school, the financial stress in our house was a living thing. You could feel it at the dinner table. You could hear it through the walls at night. I have one sibling. My brother. He is 3 years older than me, and from the time we were children, the way my parents treated the two of us was so different that even the neighbors noticed. My brother was the one they bragged about. His soccer trophies were on the mantle. His college fund was funded. When he got into Ohio State, my parents threw a party. I remember standing in the backyard at that party, eating a piece of sheet cake, thinking I have a 4. I won the regional science fair twice. I have been accepted to 3 schools. Nobody in this house has mentioned it once. I did not go to the party school. I went to a smaller state school on a merit scholarship because my parents told me plainly there was no money for tuition. I worked 20 hours a week through all 4 years. I graduated with a degree in computer science, and about $14,000 in student loans, which felt manageable. I had a plan. My brother, for the record, changed his major 4 times, took 5.5 years to finish, and graduated with debt my parents quietly co-signed without telling anyone until much later. I moved to Austin after graduation. I got a junior developer job at a mid-sized tech company, learned everything I could, and after 2 years I started taking freelance clients on the side. By the time I was 24, I was making more from freelance work than from my salary. At 25, I quit and went full-time on my own. I named the business Clarion Digital Solutions. It was just me at first, then me and 1 contractor, then 3 full-time employees and a growing client list in the healthcare and logistics sectors. At 27, I signed a contract with a regional hospital network that changed everything. It was a 3-year engagement, system integration, and data migration work. The contract value was just over $1.2 million. When I signed it, I sat in my car in the parking garage and cried for about 10 minutes. Not sad crying. The other kind. I called my mother that night. I told her. There was a pause, and then she said, "That's good, sweetheart. Your brother just got promoted, did I tell you? He's a regional manager now." I should have understood everything I needed to understand from that phone call. I didn't. I kept trying. I flew home for Thanksgiving that year. It was the first time in about 18 months I had been back to Columbus. My father's contracting business had been struggling for years, and I had known for a while that things were not good financially. What I did not know, until I sat down in that kitchen, was exactly how bad it had gotten. My father had taken out 2 personal loans against the house. My brother, the regional manager, had borrowed money from my parents twice in the past year and not paid any of it back. My mother was working extra shifts. I offered to help. I want to be clear about this because it matters later. I sat at that kitchen table and I offered to help. I said I could give them $20,000 to pay down the highest interest debt and take some pressure off. My mother looked at my father. My father said, "We don't need charity from our own daughter." I said it wasn't charity. He said, "We'll figure it out ourselves." I flew back to Austin. I sent a card with a check for $5,000 anyway. My mother cashed it. Nobody said thank you. The next several months were the best period my business had ever had. The hospital network contract was running well. I had brought on a 4th employee, a project manager named Dara, who became one of the most important people in my professional life. I was looking at commercial office space. I was talking to a small business lender about a line of credit to fund hiring and equipment for a second major contract. I was in final negotiations on. That is when the lender called me. I was in the middle of a Tuesday. I had coffee in my hand and I was about to walk into a team meeting. My phone rang and it was a number I didn't recognize, a Columbus area code. I almost didn't answer. The woman on the phone told me she was a loan officer at a regional bank in Columbus. She said they had received an application for a business loan in the amount of $80,000. The application listed Clarion Digital Solutions as the business. It listed me as the primary borrower. It included what appeared to be my signature on 3 separate documents, including a personal guarantee. She was calling, she said, because the application had been flagged during processing. The social security number matched mine, the business registration matched mine, but the contact phone number on the application was not mine, and when they tried to verify through the number provided, something didn't add up. They were calling the number on file, with the state business registration, which was my actual cell phone. I sat down on the floor of the hallway outside the conference room. She asked me if I had authorized this application. I said no. I said it very quietly and she asked me to repeat it, and I said it again. No. I had not authorized any application. I had never contacted this bank. I had never signed any document for this bank. I did not know this bank existed. She told me to stay on the line. I called Dara out of the meeting. I sat on that hallway floor, and I told her what was happening, and I watched her face go through the same thing my face must have been going through. She sat down on the floor next to me without saying a word and just stayed there while I finished the call. The loan officer told me they would be freezing the application pending investigation. She gave me a reference number and told me I should contact law enforcement and also check my credit reports immediately. She was professional and calm, and I remember thinking later that she probably had no idea she had just saved my business. I pulled my credit reports that afternoon. There were 2 hard inquiries I did not recognize. Both from Columbus area financial institutions. Both within the past 6 weeks. I called my business attorney. Her name is Patricia, and she has been my attorney since the beginning. I told her everything. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Do you have any idea who did this?" And I said, "I think I might." And she said, "Don't call them." Not yet. I hired a forensic document examiner that same week. Patricia connected me with her. I sent her copies of the application documents the bank provided. She compared the signatures to verified examples of my actual signature contracts, tax filings, incorporation documents. Her conclusion, delivered in a written report about 10 days later, was unambiguous. The signatures on the loan application documents were not mine. They were a close attempt at replication. But they were not mine. She also noted something in her report that I had not considered. The handwriting on the printed portions of the application, the address, the business description, the emergency contact had characteristics consistent with someone attempting to disguise their natural writing style. But under analysis, some letter forms were identifiable. She couldn't say definitively whose handwriting it was. But she could say it wasn't mine. I already knew whose it was. I had grown up watching that handwriting on school permission slips and grocery lists and birthday cards. It was my mother's. I want to tell you how I felt when I knew for certain. I want to be able to describe it cleanly. But it wasn't clean. It wasn't one thing. It was grief and rage and a strange cold clarity all at the same time. It was the feeling of a door closing on something you had been trying to keep open for a very long time. It was the feeling of finally understanding that the reason you could never quite get warm in a certain room was because the window had been open the whole time. I drove to Columbus. I did not tell my parents I was coming. Patricia told me not to go alone, and I brought Dara with me. We drove up on a Thursday morning and we sat in a coffee shop 2 miles from my parents' house for about an hour while I just drank coffee and looked out the window. I want to say here that I went there looking for an explanation. I went there hoping there was something I had missed. I went there, and I know this sounds like something you say, but I mean it. I went there hoping my mother would tell me I was wrong. I knocked on the door. My mother answered. She looked surprised to see me. Not guilty. Surprised. She said, "Oh, you should have called." And stepped back to let me in as if this was a normal visit. As if I had just shown up to borrow a casserole dish. My father was in the living room. My brother was not there. I sat down. I put the folder Patricia had prepared on the coffee table. I said, "I need to talk to you about a loan application that was submitted to a bank in Columbus 6 weeks ago, using my name and my business." My mother looked at the folder. She did not look at me. My father said, "We were going to tell you. I want you to hear that. We were going to tell you. Not we didn't do it. Not what are you talking about. We were going to tell you." The story came out in pieces. My father's business had a debt coming due, a supplier he owed nearly $60,000 who had been patient but was now threatening to file a lien. My brother had a situation, he had co-signed something he shouldn't have, and there was pressure on him. My parents needed money. They had tried to get a loan in their own names and been denied because of the existing debt load on the house. So my mother had the idea to use my business. She had access to some of my personal documents, old tax filings, my social security number, which she had written down years ago, because she was still listed as an emergency contact on certain accounts I had never thought to update. She had looked up what a business loan application required. She had filled one out. She had signed my name. She said, "We were going to pay it back. It would have been paid back before you ever knew." I remember the room being very quiet. I remember looking at the family photos on the wall. There is one of my brother at his college graduation. There is not one of me at mine. I said, "Mom, you committed fraud. You forged my signature on federal loan documents. You used my business as collateral without my knowledge or consent. If that loan had gone through and defaulted, it would have destroyed everything I built." She said, "You have plenty. You could have just helped us." That sentence. I have thought about it many times since. You have plenty. You could have just helped us. As if the correct response to being defrauded was to acknowledge that the fraud was really just a request for help I had been too selfish to receive. I stood up. I picked up the folder. I looked at my father, who was staring at his hands. I looked at my mother, who was looking at me with an expression I can only describe as genuinely puzzled, as if she could not understand why I was not more flexible about this. I said, "I need you to understand that I did not choose to be in this situation. You put me here. And now I have to do what I have to do." He left. Dara drove back to the hotel. I sat in the passenger seat and I called Patricia and told her what my parents had said. She listened. She said, "Did they admit it?" I said yes. My father essentially confirmed it in the first 30 seconds. She said, "Okay. Then here is what happens next." I filed a police report in Columbus. The detective I spoke with was a woman about 15 years older than me, and she was thorough and not unkind. She explained that what had occurred was identity theft and document fraud. She explained the potential charges. She explained that because the loan had not been funded, because the bank had caught it, the situation was different than if it had gone through. But that the attempt itself was still a crime. Patricia filed a civil complaint simultaneously. We also sent formal notification to both banks where the inquiries had appeared, disputing them and explaining the circumstances, which removed them from my credit report within 30 days. My brother called me 2 days after I got back to Austin. He started with "Mom is really upset," which told me everything I needed to know about how the family had processed the situation. I let him finish. He said that things were hard for the family right now, and that I was making it worse, and that there had to be a better way to handle this. I said, "Tell me what the better way would have been." He went quiet. Then he said, "You're really going to let this go to the police?" I said, "It already went to the police. I filed a report 3 days ago." He said I was cold. He said I had changed. He said money had changed me. I said, "Goodbye," and I hung up. Here is something I have thought about a lot since then. People say money changes people. And maybe it does sometimes. But I think what actually happened is that money revealed things. When I had nothing, there was nothing to take. There was no reason for anyone to look at me too closely or want too much from me. The moment I had something real, something I had built with 4 years of my life, suddenly, I was worth something to them. Suddenly, I was a resource. The money didn't change me. It showed me what I had been surrounded by all along. The investigation took several months. My mother was ultimately charged with identity theft and forgery. My father, who had known and not stopped her, was charged with a lesser count. Their attorney reached out to Patricia about a possible resolution. There were conversations I was not directly part of. Patricia represented my interests. I want to be honest with you about what I felt during those months, because I think the honest version is more useful than the clean version. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired. I felt a specific kind of sad that I don't have a perfect word for the sadness of understanding that something you hoped was one thing was actually another thing, and that it had probably always been that other thing, and you were the last one to accept it. I also felt, underneath all of that, something solid. Something that had not been there before. It was the feeling of having acted in accordance with my own values under real pressure. I had not minimized what happened. I had not let love or the habit of love, which is maybe what I had been carrying all along, convince me that I owed someone a free pass for something that was genuinely wrong. My mother pled guilty to a reduced charge. She received a suspended sentence, probation, community service, and a requirement to pay restitution, which was largely symbolic given the loan had never funded. My father pled to the lesser count and received probation. Neither of them called me after the sentencing. My brother sent a text 3 months later. It said, "I hope you're happy with yourself." I read it once and deleted it. My business continued to grow. The hospital network contract completed successfully. I hired 2 more people. I moved into actual office space. I signed a second major contract with a logistics company in Phoenix. By the end of that year, we had crossed 2.4 million in revenue. Dara got a raise. She deserved it. She has been with me through everything, and I don't think she fully knows how much that Thursday drive to Columbus meant to me. Sometimes, the most important thing a person can do is just sit on the floor next to you, without being asked. I have not spoken to my parents since the week of the sentencing. I have not spoken to my brother since I deleted his text. This is not a decision I made out of anger. Anger is temporary. This was a decision I made clearly, after a lot of thought, about what kind of life I wanted to be living. I wanted a life where the people closest to me saw me as a person. Not as a resource. Not as a safety net. Not as a problem they could solve by signing my name to things. I have a life like that now. It took me a long time to understand that building it required removing what was in the way. I want to say one more thing before I'm done, because I see the comments on videos like mine, and I know what some people are going to say. They are going to say I should have handled it privately. They are going to say family is family. They are going to say my parents were desperate, and desperate people make mistakes, and I should have found it in my heart to absorb that mistake and move on. And I want to say, respectfully, that there are some mistakes you absorb and some mistakes that would absorb you if you let them. Using your daughter's identity to commit loan fraud against her business. A business she built while you were throwing parties for someone else is not a mistake that asks to be absorbed. It is a boundary that asks to be held. I held it. That is the whole story. I built something. Someone tried to take it. I found out. I told the truth. And then I kept building. Some people are going to read this and think I was too hard. I understand that. But there is a version of this story where I stayed quiet to keep the peace, and the loan went through on the next attempt, or the one after that, and I found out when a collections call came for a debt I never knew I had. And by then, it would have been too late for the hospital network contract, too late for the Phoenix deal, too late for Dara and the 4 other people whose paychecks depend on Clarion being solvent. I chose the version of the story where I found out in time, and I kept going.